Hello again and welcome to chapter 8, and we are gonna discuss array. So far we have discussed pointer, function, and also I have lots of solved example for you how to create function and still use like pointer as a variable inside the function. So array by itself is a completely different discussion that we are going to open it up today. Hopefully everybody is gonna enjoy. And like always, I encourage everybody to please engage with the class, engage your brain and body both at the same time, bring up your visual studio, get your mind and your hand at the same time busy. Otherwise, it might be a bit complicated for yourself to learn everything by yourself. This is computer language, not human language. Definitely, this is new for everybody in the class, maybe a little bit, maybe known for some other students, but still, I try to share everything from scratch to ensure everybody can benefit equally and fairly. So let's start with simple symbols for array. Before starting anything else, I'm gonna start with the symbol for array. Remember, in the previous chapter, I mentioned that if you are going to create some pointer, definitely the symbol should be included while you are using them inside the function. If you are going to, for example, in here, for any function, if you are going to, I'm going to leave a note, create prototype, still you must use the pointer symbol, which was asterisk. Same for array. For array also, I'm gonna start with definition of array. Array is again a variable. So far you learned regular variable with no symbol. You learned pointer with a symbol, which is like asterisk. And today you are gonna learn about another type of variable called array, and the symbol is square bracket. So we have to include a square bracket in front of that variable. For example, in this example, you can see, I'm gonna just bring it up. I'm trying to define a variable such as like integer. So I'm gonna do it on my Visual Studio. Suppose I'm gonna define my variable to become just a simple integer. Integer is my data type. Then I'm gonna give it a name as a variable name. Like always, we have to define a variable name, and variable name is your choice. You can use whatever. And in order to complete it as an array, you have to use square bracket, right? And close it with semicolon. Now, since you are defining an array, if you leave your square bracket with, for example, some numbers in here, you can see the underlined red is going to be gone automatically. So what is array? Array simply means you've got a variable which you can just store multiple values or multiple, let's say, numbers in this case, because this is integer. Inside this array in here, I labeled it as test. Inside this variable, for example, since I assigned 5 in here means I'm having 5 variables, or 5, since it is integer, 5 numbers inside this. 5 doesn't mean number 5. 5 means, let me like leave you in here. 5 means, for example, in this array, I have 1, 4, 7, maybe 43. These are random numbers. This is not any rule, any regulation, just a random example that I'm trying to clarify what is that 5. 5 means 5 number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 means quantity. Doesn't mean the number 5 is inside this array. You can see that even I don't have a number 5 inside the array. It could be also number 5. But 5 in here means quantity. Means I'm having 5 numbers inside this variable. Make sense? Right? So suppose that I'm going to just show you like allocates how this one will show up in allocate memory. So I'm having 5 elements, 1, 4, 7. So element 1 for me is going to go here, just using my example. Second element is 4, third is 7, and for example here is 43 and 8. So inside the memory, they are going to be stored element by element. If I'm having 5 elements, it's going to be like this. If I'm having more, then definitely it's going to just occupy more space from the memory. I already said array isn't variable. The difference between regular variable and array variable is while we are defining an array variable, simply we have to define how many numbers if it is integer, or let's say if it is characters, how many characters are inside this array, or if it is a string, definitely the numbers needs to be defined inside it. So if I wanted to say, for example, test is the name of the array, then 5 in here inside this square bracket is the size of the array. So we call it size of the array, which in this case I'm having it as 5. Now, either I can go ahead and define exactly what numbers I'm going to leave inside this array inside here, which I can call it like I'm going to hard code it. Or again, like always, I can use a cin and go ahead, give access to the user to just seeing the numbers after the compilation process. So we have 2 methods in order to define. Also, I'm having the size to be set as 5. I can just mention also what are those 5 numbers in here or after the compilation process. Now, I already discussed this one. So now, let's practice what if I'm gonna just make it instead of number, like for example, say size, and then later define what is that. One method is initially go ahead, define another constant variable, because in case you are going to use it over and over for different arrays, you can go ahead and define a constant variable, call it, for example, size, or you can call it whatever, and say my constant variable is 5. And then repeatedly, if you are going to define multiple different array, use instead of 5 in here, use size. Like this. This is also correct. So why I do this, suppose that I'm going to, for example, define another one, which is like a double. And again, maybe test 1 or 2. And then I'm going to say even this one is the same size. So instead of keep repeating 5, again, I'm going to say size. This is another method of defining array. So anytime I'm asking you to define an array, definitely you need to declare the size of the array. Otherwise, you are going to get error. Usually, if you are going to get access to an array, it's going to be, for example, for an array with size 5 inside the memory, elements are by 1 off. So we don't say element 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We say like inside the memory. Outside for ourselves, as I show right in here, it could be, for example, in this one. We can say first element, second element, but inside the memory is by 1 off. It's always n minus 1 by 1 off. So subscripts start from 0, and for an element, for an array size of 5, it will end at 4. That's how it will be defined inside the memory. Let's go ahead and define some simple example together. I appreciate it if everybody can quickly open your Visual Studio, make yourself busy with me, practice and learn together. So I'm going to clean up my screen maybe a little bit, maximize to make sure everybody can see the example clearly. Well, I'm going to define a program to ask for the number of hours work, right? For 6 employee, suppose that you are an engineer or maybe you are somebody working either as an engineer in an engineering firm, working with a team of 6 people, and HR is asking you send us a report of their working hour. So you can use such a program, or simply if you are somebody working with HR directly, definitely you can use something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and start with defining a constant number. Please practice with me. This will help you to learn much easier. So I'll start with defining a constant integer. And this constant integer, the purpose for this definition is declaration of the size of the array. So I'm going to call it num, and I'm going to assign it to number 6. Remember, I said I'm having 6 employees to put together a report of their working hour. And then I'm gonna now start defining an array. To define an array, I start with data type based on which kind of application. Here I need just integer is good enough. And then since it is about the number of hours for my team, then I'm gonna say, I'm gonna call it hours. And then I'm gonna start with opening and closing square bracket. If you just hit the square bracket on your keypad or keyboard, automatically it will open and close at the same time. You don't need two action, just one action would be enough. As you can see on my screen, hours automatically becomes underlined red, means there is something missing. Since I already called it num, so I have to include num in here in order to get rid of that underline red. And definitely, like always, I'm going to close my statement with a semicolon. So now I'm going to get the hours worked by each employee. This is a simple see in, see out process, which I'm gonna start with first a see out, because I need to see in. Definitely it's much better to first have a pop-up question for the user, then get the user to see in some information. So I'm gonna say see in the number of hours worked by each like person in the firm. So I'm gonna start with enter the numbers, enter the numbers or whatever you would like to include in here. And those numbers should be with the number of the employees that I'm trying to report. So therefore, I'm going to say, look at num, means I need this see in, see out to happen 6 times. And right after that, I need to say, I'm going to have in here, for example, employee number 1, employee number 2, and so on. Say employees, and then a colon, and then I'm going to close it up with semicolon. Everyone following? Yeah, some feedback? So right after that, I'm going to start with scene. Scene, what I'm going to ask? Hours, right? So I'm going to see in the hours. So I would say hours. And definitely, since I'm having 6 employees, I have to start from 0. Remember I said it's going to be by 1 off. The elements are going to be by 1 off. So I start from 0 and then I close it with semicolon. So I'm going to repeat this one for another extra 5 times. For the sake of time, I'm going to repeat it as a copy and paste. This is 4, this is 5. So each time you have to make sure numbers are correct, adjusted accordingly. This becomes 3 and 4. So I'm having 6 right in here. Now I'm going to display the values in each of this array. For display again, I need the cout. So I'm going to minimize to make sure you can see everything in case you guys are behind and I'll still be able to follow. So I'm going to cout. And in here, cout is going to be the hours you entered. So for example, cin for the employee 0, I'm going to say maybe 18 hours. And then 18 hours supposed to cout. So I'm going to say cout the hours you entered, right? And I'm going to leave a colon in here and of course close it with semicolon. Now I'm going to say cout. I'm gonna leave myself just empty quotation, and each time I have to get access to the exact same command in here. For example, for employee 0, it has to be printed right in here. And I have to repeat this one again with the number of the employees, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So this should be employee number 1, 2, 3, and 4. I already had employee 0. At this point, all I have left is going to be now to just, since this is going to be the last one, there is another choice in here that you can make. For example, since this is 6, I already created 5. Since this is 6, not 5, I need to make another one. This is in here also. I need, because I already said I want them for 6, so I have to create for 6 hours. And in here, I'm gonna add the very last one. So I have 16 in here. I have 6 cout in here, and everything looks correct. Is everyone following? Yeah? Okay. Now it's time to see if there is any error. If so, I must fix it. Otherwise, so for the cout, I'm reading like the number of hours. Of course, I need to add a little bit more information in here, right? If you need, like, for example, any extra information, like, for example, any extra message, definitely you can add it in here. Otherwise, just leave it as it is. After the first cout, you have to just get access to the numbers, which is coming from num. And definitely you have to just cout maybe some message for yourself, and that's it. So let's debug. Just processing. Okay, it says enter the number 6 employees. This 6 that you can see in here is coming, let me maximize. This 6 is coming from num because I'm asking, okay, read it from the num, right? So now I have to say, for example, I'm going to say 25, 23, 24, maybe 35, and 41. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe another one, maybe 41. So the hour you entered are 25, 23, 24, 35, 41, 41. Everybody got it? Using this example, I tried to train you how you can define an array. Either you can put directly 6 in here, both methods are correct. Instead of defining a constant, you can just simply use 6 in here, or you can just define a constant and use num. even if you don't, like for example, consider this line and you say 6 in here, you simply say 6 in here as well. That method is also correct. Perfect. So let's now move on with the hope that everybody got the point, how to define an array. Next, let's practice a little bit more with, for example, accessing array content. So far, we practiced how to define an array, how to see out and see in information for those certain arrays. All we had initially, it was just defining or declaring the size of the array. Now we can just go ahead and practice how we can access element with a constant or literal subscript. I already said with the constant how you can do that. This is exactly the one that it is with a constant. And I also, with literal subscript, simply means you go ahead and just say test I, means for example in here our num. So this is exactly the same. Instead of num right in here, you can say ours num. And that's what we can just call it literal subscript. Another thing I'm gonna practice with you, this is the same example we just practiced. Another thing is using loop. Remember, we already defined how we can put some process in a loop, means in a repeated situation until the situation is true. And as soon as the situation is false, it should stop looping. We practice this one for just simple variables. We practice it for pointer, how we can use looping for the pointer. We did it in the previous chapter pointer as well. And today we are going to just use the array inside the loop. So the process is very similar how we use array, for example, for pointer or any other application. The only difference in here is if I have a for loop starting from, or let's say counting from 0, and my array size in here is 5. So I have to have my maximum. 5 is going to be my max and 0 is going to be my mean. Simply means I'm gonna start from 0 and I'm gonna stop at 5. So start at 0 means consider 0 and 0 plus 1, 0 plus 2, plus 3, plus 4, since it is 5 element, and finish it up to 5. So this is how we can use array inside a for loop. The only difference is in front of your array, you include a square bracket. In front of the array name, a square bracket, and the size of the array must be included either inside the bracket directly, or you have to define it as an assigned to 99, something like that. Both methods are correct. One more time. So I'm gonna just start the variable count at 0 and stop it at the maximum. Maximum could be based on the problem that I'm solving. And this is going to help you in order to increment from minimum to maximum. And that's what we call it looping while we are maybe considering some array. Let's look at the bound checking, maybe using this example. So I'm having a piece of code right in here. I have some integer to be a constant integer with size 3, very similar to here we had size 6, but in this example I'm having it size 3. So the only difference is the size of the array. In here is 3, in there it was 6. And then I'm gonna have the array size to be included right in here as 3 right in here. And of course, I'm having a loop. That's why I considered another regular variable as an integer to count. So this is the way that we are trying to put it together, to store 5 numbers in the 3 element. 5 numbers in 3 element. What I have in here is the size of, one more time, this is the size of the array, means I'm having size 3. But now I'm going to have the size of array to be 3, but I'm gonna have 5 value. I'm gonna write 5 value in that size. So how do I do it? I have to stop at maximum 5, and I have to, because it's 3 initially, I have to change it. I have to stop at 5, and I have to continue incrementing up to the maximum. That's how I can define a 3-element array and write 5 value inside the array. Like in here, for example, this is a 3-element array, 1, 2, 3. And still I can continue writing for 5 element. I can occupy the next 2 blocks. If I put it inside the loop, I can also occupy the next 2 blocks. After I'm done with the first 3, because the size of the array was 3, still it will continue for another 2 element right after the 3. So this 2 initially doesn't exist, but since I'm asking for it, it will be created right after that, which we call it bound checking. This is called bound checking. Now, if I do have no bound checking in C++, then we cannot add subscript. But if we do have, look at here, I said, if you do have bound checking, you cannot. But if you do have it, you can add some subscript, means you can start adding, in this case, S3, but I'm going to make it 5. You can start adding more elements to be added right after that. I already said off by 1 error could happen if you are going to use subscript, because it will start from 0 and it will stop at whatever the maximum is. There is a possibility of off by 1 error. For example, look at here, this piece of code in here. This code has like off by 1 error. I'm having a size 100 for my array, and then in here, since size is already defined, so definitely it should be 100 as a maximum. So it will start, instead of, I should say, in here, I should say start from 0. It will start from 1 and it will stop from at 100. But since it will start at 1, the by 1 off error will happen in here. Because when I say 1, it will start from the next one. So one way of error will happen. Since it is 100, 100 means start from 0 and stop at 99 and still have 100 elements. Just to clarify, what does it mean when I say by one of error? If I in here say start from 0 and stop at 100, still means my last number should be 99. But if I say start at 1 and stop at 100, I don't have 100 number in here. If 100, because always it's gonna have like the very last one to be added. If it's gonna continue from 1 and count, then last one is not 100. It won't stop in here. If you want 100, it should start at 101. That's why it's gonna be by 1 off error in this case. Now let's look at array initialization. Array initialization, so far, I did it just using cin, but initially at the beginning of the lecture, I said you do have 2 options. One option is use the cin command and get the user to cin the numbers. Like for example, in this case, since I have it still, I can show you the debugger. In this case, I use cin to enter the element of the array out of the after the compilation process. For the same example, I can use a different method. Instead of using cin command, I can go ahead and just find constant size 6 and simply give all the numbers right in here. Say equal and then open curly bracket and include all your, for example, in this example, 6 number, like whatever number my example numbers were, for example, whatever, 21. You have to include comma in between them, 23, because this is one-dimensional array. One-dimensional array, if you don't include the comma in between them, even in 2 or 3-dimensional, when we say 2 or 3-dimensional, it acts like matrix, in case you are familiar with matrix, and we are going to practice also 2-dimensional array later. 23, 24, these are random numbers again, like 31, maybe 36. How many do I have so far? One more, maybe 24. So another method is you do not need like all of this C in, C out. You can say, okay, this is my array. These are the element, the 6th element inside my array. Then later, like you don't need this part at all, for example, you may want to use another process. Either you are looking for a looping or you are looking for any other application, you can simply add it right after the array initialization. So for example, if you have another piece of example, if you have like array of size 12, you can just include all elements inside the code, and then you can go ahead and just see out, or maybe put them inside the for loop or whatever in order to see out. Let me practice that one. So for example, a for loop definitely means you are going to start from a minimum and stop at a maximum. For example, integer. In that case, you have to define a count, integer count first. And then this is just a simple integer, close it with semicolon, then say integer count, starting from 0, semicolon, count should continue up to maximum. My example is 6, then use 6, or simply use num. Either will work. I can use num. And right after that, another semicolon, and of course you have to say accumulate, means plus plus. And open and close your curly brackets to define the body of your for loop. So you can simply go ahead and say cout. In my case, it was about number of hours for employer. So for me, it's num. So then I'm going to say cout num. And I'm going to say right after that, I'm going to say just get the count, which is in my case 6. It's going to be 6, and then plus 1, and go ahead, say for example num has in here, or any other. I'm gonna create more space to have a clean cout. This is 1, and then in the next line I'm gonna say cout. For example, for my case, hours, cout the hours is gonna be an array, and the array is num. Actually, in this case now, since it is a for loop, I'm gonna say count. Cout, I have a typo, I fixed it. And right after that, say, like for example, this is going to be a message or whatever. For me, it's employee, so I'm gonna say employee. Employee, and maybe some backslash n in order to create more space. So this is all. And now I can go ahead and just cout all of these numbers, each of them in a line. So it should give me, for example, number 1 has maybe like 21 hours, then another employee 23 hours, and so on. Let's wait for the debugger to see the output. I'm gonna make this a bit maximized. There is some error in the debugger. It doesn't show it. It's there, but it doesn't show it. This is still processing. So I'm gonna close it. Okay, there is some error in the debugger. Not in the code, in the debugging process. Let me do it again. Here we go. Okay, so it simply gets the answers like number one means employee number one has 20, 21. Actually, this should be hours. I should have like have this one hours instead of employee. Number one has 21, employee 23, employee, and so on. So this is just optional text. You can just include anything. Any question for me? So I'm gonna pause right in here and wait for you if you have any question. So far we have discussed how we can just define a variable size. We have practiced how we can use cout command in order to define the elements for that certain array. And also we practice how we can just initialize the array element just inside the code, as you can see on my screen. That was a summary of what we practiced so far. Now it's time to go ahead, add a little bit more information to this. Just keep in mind, what do I have here in my debugger? So for example, I do have like 6 to be my maximum, or the number, the size of, or let's say the integer is a number. So it's the number that it is going to show me the size of my array. And this is how my debugger is displaying the information for me. Now, suppose that still I'm having 6 numbers in here to be the size of the array, right? But instead of defining 6 elements to be assigned to each of those numbers, number of employee, I'm gonna have less. For example, if it is 6, I'm gonna remove 2 of them and just have 4 numbers. Then what will happen? That's what we call it partial, as you can see here, partial array initialization. Means I do have the maximum size for my array, or the size of my array to be 6 in this case. But the number of elements being assigned to that certain array is less than the array size. Then do you know what will happen? Still, inside the compile, inside the computer, I am going to have like 6 spots being assigned to this array, but any spot with no number will be assigned to 0 automatically. For example, right now I do have only 4 of them. Remember what was the result before? What if I debug again? I won't get any error. No error will happen. Instead of that, any of the element with no number will be set to 0. And this is just what it was before, because I put it in a loop. So in order to just go ahead and have that, you may want to not to put it inside a for loop. Like cout. Let me just put it back. And instead of putting it in a loop, just cout like this. It will cout all of the hours with no number, right? So it will cout the rest with just 0. So look at here, it won't consider count because I'm not using it. That's why it didn't give me the results. So I'm not going to have this one anymore. I'm not going to have this line at all. Hours is going to be num in order to implement the new method. And let's see if that helps. Still, the previous answer is stored, so there is a bug. The only way to get rid of it is simply just deleting this page and copying it in a new page, because the previous answer is a start, regardless of how much I edit it, it's just showing me that one. But regardless of that, just for the purpose of this example, there are situations we are defining partial array. So simply means the array size is bigger than the number of the elements we are defining. In that case, automatically the rest of the array, the rest of the elements are going to be set to 0, and you won't get error at all. There are situations that we are going to process array content. So how do we do that? Remember, so far I just had it in the previous example. We had it to be incremented inside the loop. That's one method to increment or decrement. This is increment, this is decrement. Another method is, instead of putting it inside the loop, just simply go ahead, for example, in here, hours. Being assigned to size num, just increment hours like this, hours num, increment it. So now incrementing could be out of the array or could be inside, right? If you are going to add, for example, start from number 1, then you have to just add 1 to hours. It will be add to hours. But if you put it inside, the number of employee will change. That's the difference. If you say, for example, hours in here, if you say it as hours num, this is a array, then say num. If you put plus or increments outside, what will happen in this case? You are going to each time get the num, or let's say you are going to add 1 to the whole hours, right? Simply means if for first one is 21, it will be added to this one, becomes like 22. But if you are going to have the same thing in here, hours, again, num, but include plus plus inside, then you are going to increment num. Increment num means if initially it is 6, it will add 1 to 6. If it is like 5, it will add 1 to 5, and so on. That's the difference between these two. So it doesn't have, in this case, it doesn't have any impact on hours. It will impact the size of the array if you put it inside the bracket. There are situations you are going to assign to array to each other, or let's say to copy one array to another array. You simply know that if you have one single equal sign, simply means assignment, doesn't mean equal. So suppose you have two different array, one of them is new test, the other one is test. It doesn't work this way like regular assignments, since these are array. If it was just regular variable, sure, that may work. But since these are array, you cannot assign them that way. You have to go ahead, put them inside the loop. Why? Because in this case, if I have 6 elements, these elements must be assigned to each other inside the two array, element by element. And the only way to assign elements by element is use looping. So I'm going to say in this case, for example, start a for loop. Again, start from maybe I equal to 0. And definitely for me, before I had it count. So I'm going to again define count. And then in here say count. Start from there and go ahead, continue count up to less than num, and go ahead, increment count. This is what we had before. Now you are going to write after that, in case you have two arrays. So I'm going to define another array for the purpose of practicing this part. So initially I had hours. I'm going to define another one, call it employee or whatever. And then this one with the same size. I'm going to again say num. to make sure I won't get error. So then how do I assign them to each other? I simply go ahead in here and say, now get the hours, and I must include num, definitely assign to the second one is employee. Employee, again, same array size. This way, both of them will be assigned one by one. The reason for this one is the typo, so I'm gonna just have it in, gonna have both of them to be the same typo to avoid error. Yeah, both these two array, whatever the name is, regardless of what the name is, both array will be assigned to each other element by element. So the only way to do so, you must include it inside the for loop. Next, I'm gonna print the content of any array. We already used the cout. So for example, here I defined, like, for example, integer hour. Definitely I can go ahead and say cout, like what we did in the previous example. The hours, cout hours. And this is how we print out content of the array. In this case, it's 21, 23, 24, 31, and so on. Next is, like in this case, if you are going to have, like in this case, I had a character, char. So if it is a char or if it is the integer, you can do so. And then in any other case, like for example, what I have, if like it is like inside the for loop, you can go ahead, just put it inside the for loop, and then even write inside the for loop command the cout. If you do have, like for example, in here, two of them being assigned, you can just inside the for loop go ahead and just the way that I did it right in here. This is an integer. It's under the for loop. Go ahead and call it. And of course, you can, if it is not character, you can go ahead, include the hours num as well to print out the content of the hour num. But if it is character, you don't need to include the bracket like here. You don't need to include bracket if it is char or character, and you do need to include it if it is any other type, unless you are using a for loop. So next one, we already practiced this one, simple loop to add together is right in here. I'm gonna go ahead and practice some example for you. We already practice this part. Partially filled array means simply you have like 6 size, but you do have less than 6. That simply means partially filled array. Comparing to array means exactly what I did. I do have 2 array. First, I assign this to array to become equal, but there are situations you want to compare them. Comparing is also happening elements by elements. So I'm going to give some elements to this one too. Let me reduce this one to 3 to have a simpler practice, and I'm gonna give this one also 3 numbers. For example, 10, 25, and 15. Now I do have 2 array with their own, and I'm gonna get rid of this part for practicing the comparing array. And I'm gonna start comparing them. How do I do that? Again, I have to put them inside a loop. Last time we wanted to assign, we used the for loop. Now I'm going to compare. Instead of loop anything, definitely first I need to define a variable to start from minimum, and I define count. Now I'm gonna loop them. So I would say while whatever my array is. Since this is just comparing, I need another variable, which is a Boolean variable. So I have to go ahead define my bool to become like compare, for example. whatever, it could be any, compare true. Since this is a while loop, I need to define it properly. So I have to start from compare, right? And I'm gonna say and operator count less than num. Then I'm gonna start with some conditional statement. If my hours, which is my first array, if hours, which is also num, and I don't need the space in here, and right in here, I have to say it's not equal. If this one is not equal to my second one, which is employee, I'm gonna use the exact same variable name in here. Then do what? And this one also is num. While your compare and count less than num, if, like for example, for me, my hours is not equal to employee. If these two are not equal, I think I'm missing something in here. Let me check one more time. I'm gonna have this integer to go here to get right up. And I'm gonna close this one to get that error to be fixed. Now, while if hours are not equal to this one, then go ahead, put this one inside your parentheses. Check it. If these two are not equal, then say false. Then say my array, my compare is false. My compare is assigned to false. Close it with semicolon and start incrementing. Increment. That's it. This is one condition. You can go ahead and add more condition, but at this point, just this is for showing you how to use it, how to compare. You go ahead, define some minimum for your looping. Definitely you have to keep in mind, anytime you are looping, you must start from a minimum. You have to stop at a maximum. Definitely you have to have a variable for that. I just said it. Then you need to define a flag variable. This one we call it flag variable. Flag variable. Anytime that you are, again, using conditional or let's say looping at the same time, then you have to define a flag variable to check the true and false statement for you. If you don't define that, you cannot check the true and false statement. And right after that, you can go ahead and define another condition. You can say, for the, like, for example, else condition, go ahead and have compare out of if statement to see out, for example, true or equal or whatever. This is just a simple see out. Let's say equal. And then end L or backslash N, either will work. Next line, say else, see out. Like, for example, not equal. Not equal. And then end L. And that's it. Make sense? Everyone got the point? I'm gonna minimize to make sure everybody can see. In this example, I was trying to demo how do you compare two different arrays. When I say compare means look at the size of them. And in C++ programming, anything about the array is supposed to happen element by element. That's why I have to define a flag variable. I have to define a variable to start as minimum and to stop at maximum, which is the size of those two arrays. And then element by element, I will check the element 0 of the hours with element 0 of the employee. I will compare them. If they are equal, it will say equal. If they are not, it will say not equal. Elements by element means it will check 21 and 10, 23 and 25, 24 and 15. In this case, none of them are equal. Make sense? I don't think this one could debug because there is a saved error, but still I try. Apparently the error, yeah, there is a saved error in the debugger, remember? So in order to debug it, I have to create a brand new example. That's answer for the previous examples is automatically saved in the debugger. So I have to go ahead and define, but the example is correct, but debugger is stuck somewhere. So now I'm going to use parallel array. Guys, these examples are not complete example. If you go through it and get errors simply because I don't complete the example. Each time I'm just removing one part to demo another skill. So don't look for right answer or correct answer from these examples. Some of them are still missing, still there are information to add, still there are like cout scenes to add. So, but each time I remove one part to demo, but at the end, definitely I'm gonna solve complete exam to demo only the skill for that certain part. There are situations that we do have parallel array. Like for example in here, parallel arrays right in here means two or more arrays that they are having similar data. Okay, in that case, we call them parallel array. So, like for example, one array is going to be ID with size 5. The other one is an average for some course, average grade for some course, still with size 5. Another one, as this one is integer, this one is double, but the last one is character or char. This one is still another one, grade, with the same size 5. So my array sizes are still the same. And now I'm gonna just parallel them. How do I do? Like any other method, like for example, assigning, comparing, still I have to use looping. Anytime that I'm dealing with multiple arrays and I'm trying to just communicate, or let's say exchange some information, compare, assign, or whatever between the arrays, I must use looping because there are multiple numbers or elements inside that those certain arrays that needs to be, in this case, like parallel element by element, or if it is comparison, compared element by element. So again, I go through the same process. I start from minimum. Definitely, again, I need the minimum. In this case, on my Visual Studio, you can see count. Here on the lecture slide, you can see, for example, I'm starting with my minimum in here being defined as I. I, in this case, is just for the minimum, another variable that needs to be defined somewhere. Look at here, I have like some spot left, means there are more information missing in this part of the example, but we are demoing another. Same in here, there are more information missing. That's why you get error. So I'm gonna start from minimum, stop at size is 5. I'm gonna stop at size 5. I'm gonna accumulate. So each time it's going to read. When I say parallel means information of this, in this case, 3 arrays are going to be related. Like for example, I'm gonna first read student ID and then student name ID and then the average for that student and the grade for that student. So these are parallel array, means everything is about the same situation. Now it's time to go ahead and complete one example completely together to make sure you have enough practice of this. Let me clean up my screen. Get ready to practice with me. So let me just get rid of that error from the debugger to ensure that, yeah. See, still, even I have nothing. Look at here. I have nothing in my Visual Studio, but when I debug, still I get that saved answer in here. So in order to fix it, I'm gonna keep my template, get rid of this because there is a fixed error in here. I'm gonna go ahead and define just a brand new project with no error to be able to debug it for you. So I'm gonna clean up right in here and go ahead, start from scratch. Now I have a clear template with no errors, so I can just start programming. You may want to use using namespace, std, and go from there. So I'm going to put together a code for you to use two parallel array, one for hours and then another one for hours of work, another one for pay rate. Just from the beginning, I'm gonna start with hash include. Since I'm gonna just assign them, they are parallel, I'm gonna have a clear screen. Therefore, definitely I may need IOManip. So I'm gonna just add it from now. And now I can just go ahead and start first defining my size for the array. Usually we better to start defining the size first. So I'm gonna call it num again, integer num for simplicity, and I'm gonna give it number 5. Next, I'm gonna go ahead and define my hours of work. So another one which is going to be hours is integer as a variable and hours. So I define very similar to what I used to have, but since that one had error, I started from scratch to be able to debug it for you. So since I call it num, I have to use num. And I'm going to go ahead define another one, array in order to hold the pay rate. Since pay rate might have decimal, this time I'm going ahead and I'm using double. And this is going to pay rate, so I'm going to say pay. And again, num, which is the number of employees, which I'm having only 5, and close it with semicolon. Now I'm gonna have some input. So I'm gonna input the hour work and the hourly pay for each of this employee. First, I'm gonna see out. Go ahead, leave a message and say enter the hours. Enter hours or any other message you want. Just give it some space and go ahead, read them from num, which is the size of the array. And of course, right after that, create another message and say, like for example, employee number 0, I'm going to leave some space to have a better display, and then say employee and you want their pay rate as well. And there, I'm going to create some space, backslash n, pay rate. I want it to be just with some space, and in the next line, that's why I use backslash n, and right after that, just go ahead and say our pay rate. Another message, our pay rate. That's it. And of course, you can close the statement, give it backslash n, and close it up with semicolon. Right after that, remember, I'm practicing parallel, right? So I'm going to create parallel between, I have two array, between array hours and array pay. Therefore, I must, as I mentioned, use a looping process. So I would say for, I already defined this, but I need to just again define another variable. I already defined those, so now I'm gonna define another variable. So I would say integer. Either I can define it right in here, say for example index, and at the same time assign it to 0, or you can define it from before. Either will work. And then I want the index to be less than, my maximum in here is 5, but assigned to num, less than num. And right after that, what you need is just another semicolon and increment your index from 0 to 5. Simply means start from employee number 1, continue till 5, each time by 1, add by 1. So then I'm going to go ahead and define my for loop. So start with cout, your hours, let's say hours, that's it, simple. And since this is hours, for hours for employee number to make it more understandable, and then start with reading from those index plus 1. Since I wanted to increment by 1, go ahead, say index plus 1 to increment by 1, and then continue with just maybe a simple message to have a better printout, and then close it up with semicolon. After each scene, cout, you need a scene now, because you need the hours for each of them. So scene, for example, hours in this case, and now you cannot use num anymore. You have to use this one. You have to use index. So in here, you have to say index and close it with semicolon. Continue with another cout and go ahead, say hours. This one is hours number. This one is actually hourly per rate. So say pay rate for employee number, and go read it from, again, index plus 1, and then go ahead and say another empty spot in here to read it and type it in there, and semicolon. And the very last one is going to be your C8 for the pay rate. So then C in your pay, because I called it pay, so I have to use the same one. And this is also an array. I'm gonna push this down and complete this one to be, again, index, and close it with semicolon. So far I have completed just collecting the information for the hours and for the pay rate. And right after that, I'm going to display each employee gross pay. To calculate the gross pay, of course, you have to go through some mathematical maybe expression. Before that, I'm going to first debug this, and then we will continue with that one. That would be an extra step for the same example. So look at here. I have inter hours. I got num, that's why 5 is printed out right in here, and their hourly pay. So hour for number 1, I wanted to say, this is very similar to the previous example. Debugger was stuck somewhere, that's why I repeated, and now I am kind of debugging this before I add more information. So for number 1 hours, let's say 23, and then pay rate is gonna be, let's say 50, and then number 2, it's gonna be like 24, maybe 52, 23, maybe 53, and 26, maybe 51 and 0.5, and the last one is going to be maybe 20. 5 again, and 52.2. So it will give me option to just have the enter, C out, and then C in for each of them. Next, I'm going to get, for example, for employee number 4 or number 5, I'm going to get the average pay rate. So in order to do that, I have to have 25 times 52.2. So in order to make it a shorter process, I'm gonna reduce this to only 2 to have less number and save time, but still be able to demo the complete example for you. So in order to do so, I'm gonna add a C out, and then I'm gonna just go ahead and say one message in here, which is the gross pay. And I'm gonna go ahead and right after that, just add endl and move to the next line. And I want it to be fixed. Remember, I already added IO manip. Now I'm going to use it. So I want it to be a fixed. This is just a little bit for cleaning up my display, not anything technical. So I'm going to just even have show point. Show point is for the situation that I have no decimal. Still, I'm going to display 0. And right after that, I can define the set precision as well. Kind of, this is also a review from other material that we have practiced before. And my set precision means the number of decimals I'm going to display is only 2 for this example. And that's it. Right after that, again, since I'm going to just calculate average pay rate for each of my employees, definitely I have to use conditional statement to be able to calculate element by element. So I would say for, again, I assign my index to start from 0, and I'm gonna just continue index to be less than num, and I'm gonna just increment index by 1. Right after that, I'm gonna put it inside the loop and define the body of my for loop. Gonna maximize to make sure everybody can see clearly. I'm gonna say, but because I'm calculating my gross pay definitely has some decimal point. Therefore, I have to use double, not integer. Pay attention. And I'm gonna define gross pay, and I'm gonna assign it. So you have two options. Either go ahead separately in a single line, define double gross pay, and then in the very next line, then define how to calculate gross pay. Or you can just do both of them in a single line. My preference is doing it in a single line. So I'm gonna say now go take hours, and definitely since you are calculating, it has to be index, not the num. Also, in some cases, both of them are equal. Multiply by pay, again, index, and close this with semicolon, and then C out. C out, go ahead and say employee. Remember in the previous one, I had employee number, or let's say hours number, or whatever. You can just have similar. And then go ahead, say this time, get the index plus 1, and go ahead and add either end L or just leave it as it is. Maybe leave it as it is, or you can add end L or backslash N as well. And then in the next line, you want the pay as well. So the gross pay. So I want the gross pay to be in dollar. Therefore, I can just go ahead, leave myself colon plus some space. And then you can leave the dollar sign. And just right after that, you can just get this information from the equation which I in here defined it. You can just go ahead and say get this one from gross pay, and right after that, and close up for loop, get out of it and return 0. And that's it. So we have a complete example in here. If you look at the bottom of my screen, you can see I've got the green check mark, no error, no issue. I'm gonna minimize as much as everybody can see the whole example in a single page. As you can see, I started with defining the size of my array, And then I started with making this two array to become parallel. So now I'm gonna debug. Definitely I have to have some pop-up question to give me option to enter the hourly pay rate and go from there. So now I just reduced the number of employee to 2, as I said earlier, to have a less work in here. So for employee number 1, suppose I'm having 23 hours and the pay rate is 50. For employee number 2, I have like 24 and the pay rate suppose is 51.5. Now I can calculate the gross pay for each of the employees. I'm gonna maximize as much as you can see both the program and the debugger answer on the same screen. Like for example, for the first one, it will take 23 times 50 and it will get like 1150. For the second one, 24 times 51.4.5, sorry, and it will get $1,236 as a gross pay. Make sense? Everyone got the point? This is how we can create two parallel arrays. So once again, I'm gonna bring in my slides to show you how this will happen. Suppose that I have only 2 employment, means only this 2. So I will take the first one, right? The hours for the first one, which is employee number 1, and it will just consider it and it will calculate the pay rate accordingly. It will do the same for the rest. So it does like everything element by element. Let's just continue. If you guys have any question, feel free to ask before I add more information. Anything which you need me to clarify with more detail, feel free to ask. I'm gonna pause for a few seconds to help anyone who need more clarification. Okay, so let's continue with array as function. Remember, even in the previous section, I taught you how to first define some pointers, use them just inside the main function, and then I just added more information to be able to use pointer inside the function. And we had also another complete lecture in order to how to define extra functions after or like before your main function. So now we are going to do the same thing, but this time instead of pointer inside the function, we are going to have array as a function argument. When I say pointer as a function argument simply means still you are going ahead like in here, defining your function as regular, but argument is going to be either pointer or array. So you cannot go ahead and add directly pointer to here or array to here. It must be inside the argument as a parameter, not out of the argument. And that's how we are going to have arrays as function arguments. So now, suppose that I'm having a function called show score. It's a void. Either I can have only a single argument, a single parameter inside the argument, as you can see right in here. This is a single parameter, just one integer plus the array sign, which is the square bracket. So this is the function prototype, not the function header file. That's why I do not have variable in here. Anytime that you are missing the variable name simply means that's the function prototype, not the header line of the function. If it is header line of the function, like in here, this is the function header line, you must have the variable name as well, right? So variable name is mandatory inside the header line, but not inside the function prototype. Or you may have sometime your argument to include multiple parameters. Maybe one of them array, but the other one just regular variable. So again, this is my header line. In the header line, I can see that I do have integer test as an array, but integer size as a regular variable. There are situations even I can have another parameter in here to be a pointer as well. So you can have even pointer and array at the same time, right? So, but if you are creating the function prototype, you must make sure that you are erasing the variable name, regardless of it is regular variable like this one, it is pointer like this one, sorry, it is array like this one, or it is, for example, pointer. Even if there is pointer, still you have to remove the variable name from the prototype and only include it in the header line of the function. Let's practice quickly this one. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna just create an extra for the sake of time. Maybe simply, I'm gonna add a little function right after this one to practice just a little bit about how I can have array as an function argument. So I'm gonna say void, I'm gonna say pay rate, I'm gonna define some integer num, and this integer num is going to be one array, and another one integer size, and this is going to be a regular variable. And I'm gonna inside my function say for my integer. So this is how we can assign. This may not work because I'm just simply focusing, just added a new function. So this new function has nothing to do with the previous one. That's why I'm not debugging it. I'm just explaining how to add array as an argument inside the function. So I'm going to say for integer, for example, whatever my integer minimum, I'm going to call it index. Start from, remember, you have to always start from a minimum and increment index up to less than, in this case, I call it size. So say size. And of course, you have to say index increment, right? And then you may want to have some cout. Cout, get your cout. In this case, I'm going to get it from num. And definitely it must be in here, it must be index. And then go ahead and say maybe some empty spots and close it with semicolon, or just add ML and then semicolon. So this is how we can just create a function. An array in here is an actually array as function argument. This is an array as function argument. So I just created the header line. I'm going to practice with you creating the prototype. I take that one, I bring it here. Remember, this is the prototype. For the prototype, I must remove num and I must remove size. I must remove both. And then still I have to keep the array symbol. If I don't keep the array symbol, definitely I'm going to get some errors. So you have to pay attention. You must remove it. Next, suppose that I'm going to return this one. I'm going to practice even that part with you. So in order to simplify and be able to display, so I'm going to get rid of all of this to be able to debug it for you. Otherwise, I may get some error. So I don't need any of this. All I need is just a constant, for example, size. And then I do have hours. So I'm going to give it some numbers, maybe only two. I'm going to say 15 and 16 in order to be able to debug this example for you. I don't need this one, and I don't need this one. This is from the previous example. And all I need is just calling the function. My function name is pay rate, so I must just call it in order to complete the process. So I would say pay rate. Then I can just go ahead and I can say my integer in here is hours, so I have to use exactly hours. And I have to use num. both of them must be just included in here. And right after that, semicolon and return 0. So look at here, I have no error. I got right up the previous example. And I can just go ahead and debug. Definitely, I have to get 15 and 16, which are the output for the code. As you can see, I got 15 and 16 as my hours, and actually for employee number 1 and employee number 2. Make sense? This is how we practice array as function argument. There are situations we maybe, like for example, we need to, let me just close this one. There are situations you need to, for example, edit this one, modify arrays inside the function. If you want to modify here, since pay rate is a function, if you want to modify them, definitely you have to modify the array inside the function as well. So at this point, I'm gonna pause and give you some time to ask any of your questions. And then I'll continue with two-dimensional array. Let's continue with two-dimensional array, which is going to be a bit more complicated than one-dimensional array. I'm gonna just go to the right slide to start from scratch about two-dimensional array. Still, most of the rules and regulations are similar to what we have discussed from the beginning of this session, but remember I said there are situations that you are dealing with some metrics. That's what we call it two-dimensional array or multiple dimensional. It's not only two, it could be two or more dimensional arrays. But for now, we are only practicing two-dimensional arrays. So in case of dealing with two-dimensional array, simply we are looking at a table, including some rows and some columns. Suppose that, look at here, I'm going to clean up my screen to start practicing maybe two-dimensional array. Suppose in here I'm having only the size for 1D array. 1D array means I do have only either one row or one column. It's a 1D. So I would say num only is assigned to 2. But if I am dealing with 2-dimension, definitely you have to include some comma in here. And if that's num, let's call it maybe raw from now, since we are practicing 2-dimension and column. So my raw is 2. Suppose my column is 3. It's a 2 by 3 table. And then I can just go ahead in here also, instead of saying, let's say I'm going to call it exam, instead of saying exam with only raw, which was 1-dimension, now you have to put the col or column also as another. Definitely, I don't need this part at this point. And I'm going to clean up this part, which is a part of previous example, to avoid any confusion for you guys. So this is how I define a two-dimensional array. I definitely need two sizes, one size for the raw, one size for the column, right? And then I have to go ahead and define my array with those two sizes for the rows and for the columns. When I talk about two-dimensional array, regardless of how many rows I have or how many columns I have, I'm talking about the table. Means definitely more than one element with two perspective. So for example, these are going to be, this one is going to be my 1, 2, 3 columns all in yellow. And then I'm gonna have the rows. How many? 1, 2, 3, and 4 columns, 4 rows, all in pink. But still it's a 2-dimension. That's 1 dimension, and this is the 2nd dimension. So we use 2 subscales. Let's quickly go ahead and define a simple code to practice this one. I already defined my constant. Guys, for the rows and columns, you do have like two options. Either you can go ahead and define both of them, just if they are integer, which always it must be integer, just in a single line as I did, or you can just define two like simple constant, instead of having both in here, say constant int raw is 2, and then again in the next line constant int column is 3, or so on. And then for example, I want some cout, right? So I'm gonna say cout. Let me add a little bit more information, since I'm playing with array with maybe just 2 rows and 3 columns. So I'm gonna say maybe some double before I go through more. I'm gonna say double. I'm looking at number of sales, since I'm preparing a program to demo a 2-dimensional array for a sale situation. So I would say double sale. And since it is like 2-dimension, I have to actually, in here I said exam. I have to make it like sale to give it more detail and make it a bit more complicated to demo functionality of this one, make it raw, and this one say column, right? So give it like double sales, then number of the rows, and then number of the columns, and then close it with semicolon. This one should be capital, that's why it's giving me error. So right after that, go ahead and just define another number, because definitely you need to just hold the total sale. We are going to calculate total sale. Again, it might come with some decimal, therefore I'm going to use double, and I'm going to just call it total sale. Total sale doesn't need to be array at all. Just assign it to 0, and then go ahead and just define another integer to calculate the division and quarter, which is going to be a loop counter. Remember I said in order to calculate some counter, I need to start with some minimum. Those minimum in this example, I'm going to call them division and quarter. So right after that, I need to calculate the total sale. In order to calculate the total sale, definitely I need first some numbers. So I'm gonna have some pop-up questions. Cout. I'm gonna say, what is this whole program about? This program is to calculate total sale. Total sale. And then you can say \n and close it up. And then I'm gonna say all the company's division. What is the company division? Cout the company division. Company's division. Again, you can just close it with \n. And then another cout for the information, the required information. Cout, like for example, enter info. And again, in order to make it a bit nicer, this time I'm gonna give it 2\n and close it up with semicolon. So now, in order to give you another practice for the looping, this time so far I have like too many examples from the beginning of the session for looping, but this time I'm gonna give you nested loop to remind you what was nested looping. At the same time, I'm teaching you about a 2-dimensional array. So pay attention. I'm practicing nested loops to file the to fill the array with quarterly, right? Because I already said division and quarterly. So now I'm going to just create some nested loop. I'm going ahead and say first start with 4. Remember, I already defined this variable to use it as an minimum to be assigned to 0, and then continue and have that division up to less than the rows. For me, it's just raw. And definitely you have to have your division to be accumulated. Since I said I'm gonna remind you how we were using nested loop, it's time to define another loop right in here for the quarterly. So I would say again for, again open parentheses, I already had QTR to be used as minimum. And then I have to say QTR up to less than. This one is going to be the column. I already called it column. Make sure that you are using the same spell to avoid error, and close it up with accumulating your quarterly. It's time to go ahead and have all the comments for the cout. Let's say, for example, what's the division? I'm gonna say division and give it some space and say read it from PIV plus 1 and close it up. Do the same for the quarterly. Cout, cout, and then the message is quarter. Maybe I'm gonna have quarter in here, and then read this one from QTR plus 1. And of course, since this is going to be in dollar, I'm looking at sale. This is going to be in dollar. Right after that, I want it to be shown as colon, dollar sign, some more space, and get the semicolon to close the statement for you. Now it's time to remember I said I'm looking for the information, enter information. This one has extra Y, so cin. This scene is going to be, since I'm looking at the sale, number of sale, right? Definitely I have to have sale. Look at here, that's my variable. So I have to say read it from this. But instead of column and aura, I have to now use division and quarter. So I have to say sale, but it must be the same spell. Sale, again here, and here should be array QTR, and right after that close it with semicolon. Get out of the nested loop, close this loop, right? So in here open it, and in here this whole thing should be inside the nested loop, and in here just get out of the nested loop and cout just NL to create more space, and create one just blank line, just a simple blank line. That's it, to give you more space between the information. Now I'm going to use another nested loop to add all of these elements. So I have to get out of all this, just right in here, get out of both of them. I'm going to minimize to show you where I am. This is the first nested loop. I'm going to remove extra space, and I'm going to come out of here. So I'm going to create another nested loop. So I would say for, again, same, division is starting from 0, division starting from 0, and continue up to less than, actually raw again, and then accumulate division, very similar to what I did. Then go ahead, open your curly bracket, go inside, start nested loop. Again, say for, but this time for QTR, starting from 0, and then QTR up to less than column, and then accumulate column. sorry, accumulate QTR. So I'm done with this step. And all I have is calculating. Remember, I said I'm going to calculate the total sale. All I have left is calculating the total sale. So I have to go ahead inside here before I get out of the for loop. Right in here, I'm going to calculate my total sale. It should be exactly the same way I had it defined right in here with the same spell to avoid error. And in order to calculate that, I should say plus equal sale. I already had sale. And sale is going to be again array with row and column. Sorry, this time since I'm calculating and I define division and quarter, so I have to say QTR and division, not with the initial row and column, since I defined it inside the loop. So I have to use QTR and division for the row and column. So I'm done with the second nested loop. I can just close this statement with semicolon, get out of the loop, and I'm gonna maximize for you. Get out of the loop and start just see out. Since I have already look at here, included IO manip, so I can go ahead, use set precision, fix, show point, and any of this fancy stuff, just for the purpose of maybe extra practice. So I would say fixed, and then I want show point, and then I want set precision. In this case, simple. I'm going to again use only 2 and then just close the statement. Right after that, see out the total sale is just colon and maybe dollar sign, maybe some extra space in here, and go ahead, close the statement. And very last statement is see out. Actually, you can do even simpler. Before closing it from here, you can just go ahead and say, read this one from total sale, and they'll to avoid extra line. Both of them are correct. Either you can go ahead, have this one as a single cout right after, or you can have both of them in a single line and then return 0 and done. So now I'm gonna check and see if there's any error. I should go ahead and fix it. Otherwise, I'll be fine to start actually. My total sale is defined 0. Then I have my division quarter. Everything looks fine, but some unexpected error is here, which I don't think this one is an error. After I debug, probably it will go away automatically. If not, then I'll come back and fix it. Let me see. There is no error, but let me see. Yeah, as I mentioned, there is no error. That's maybe some default thing is happening in here. So this program is to calculate total sale. Everything looks fine. There is no error. And I'm asked to have some division 1, quarter 1. How many do I have? 2 by 3. So it's a matrix of 2 rows and 3 columns. So I'm going to say, for example, 23. And then for division 1, quarter 2, maybe 24, 25, and then it will move to division 2, quarter 1. Remember in here, I just commanded and like cout and del, so that's why it's giving me some line between them, maybe 32, 33, 34, and 4 just is a like 2 row by 3 column. 2 row means actually in here by 3 column. So these are the rows and these are the columns. So it's going to be the total sale is 171 using the numbers that I have entered in here. Make sense? Everyone clear? Perfect. So still we have some time, so I'm gonna go ahead and explain a little bit more of two-dimensional array for you right on the screen to ensure you guys have enough practice. So this is a summary of what I just said on the screen using one example. This is a two-dimensional array of 2 by 2, right? It's a 2 by 2. If I'm having a 2 by 2 means I do have two numbers. Okay, another information I need to give you to practice this part. So remember in here, I used cin command to enter the information. That's one method. Another method, like every other example, is just entering information inside the code. Like, for example, going ahead in here, adding information for the rows and columns right in front of the code. If you don't want to use the scene and you want to use the program only for one practice. Otherwise, you can just go ahead and give it the scene or let's say user interaction. So this part is like about the parameters. If you are having a, let's say more than two arguments inside, like you're very similar to what we did before. Two-dimensional array as parameter argument means you are looking at a function. If you are looking at the function and you are having a two-dimensional array, the method of using of two-dimensional array is exactly the same as what I did for you for one-dimensional array. The only difference is inside the argument. If your parameter is a two-dimensional array, use square bracket. And that's the only difference. So if you're looking at prototype, definitely again remove the variable. Either it is regular variable or it's an array. And still inside the header line, you must keep the variable name to avoid any error. So this is going to be the last example, which I'm gonna give you in here. And then I leave the review part for yourself. So I already practiced with you two-dimensional array. Now let's first look at this part and then I'll give you the last example to close this section. So remember I said it's not only two-dimensional array as a maximum number of arrays that we can have in programming. There are situations that we are dealing with more than two. Any number more than two could be 3 or 4 or any other number. There is no limit for the dimensions inside the array. In that case, for example, look at here. This is a three-dimensional array. I'm looking at a let's say rectangular shape or whatever could be the problem that you are going to solve. In that case, you have, for example, 3 dimension, 2, 3, 5. Each of them is 1 dimension. Or you can have 4 dimension, right? It doesn't matter. It could be any dimension more than one. And the rules and regulation always the same. Again, look at here. This is the prototype for a function. If this is a prototype for a function and you have more than one dimension, definitely again, or more than 2 dimension, you have to avoid including the variable and the difference in here. If you have more than 2 dimension, you must always, this is mandatory, you must always leave the first dimension size empty. First one must be empty. I have also mentioned it in here. First dimension must be always in both header line and the prototype empty. So that's all in there. About the vector, a vector is a command. Vector is just a simple command. It's not like pointer or it's not like array. It's a command. So whenever we are going to look at, for example, any other numbers to add a space, if we need like more space, we don't need to look at the size definition. Like for example, in array, we are defining the size. But if we are not sure about the size, we can go ahead and use vector. Vector is coming before the data type. That's the only difference of using vector. For example, for array, first we define data type, then variable like in here. For array or any other variable, first we include data type. I'm going to maximize. Then we give it a variable name. Then, for example, if it is an array, we give it the array dimension or the array size. But if you are using vector, I'm going to just move here and leave it as a comment. First, we have to say vector. Vector is a keyword. You cannot adjust it. And then instead of square bracket or maybe just parentheses or anything, we have to use just this simple bracket, and inside define any variable accordingly. This is how we define the vector. So first we say vector, then we say data type. It could be any data type. Then we give it variable, for example, a scores or any other variable. So data type and scores could change, but the vector is a keyword. So now, how do we define a vector? In order to use vector, first step is going back to the beginning of the code, use hashtag include. If you don't get access to vector library or header file, you cannot use it inside the functions, either main function or any other function. Definitely you have to get first access to vector in order to use it. Right? You have to add the library. That's the first step. So vector is holding integer element, right? Then if you are looking at vector to just become an integer, you have to like use the integer as I mentioned inside the bracket and then give it some variable. There are situations, let me practice this one. Maybe right after here, I'm going to make some space. Let's say I'm going to use vector, right? So I can use vector since I already defined it in there. And I'm going to say vector is going to be integer, right? And then I'm going to say another variable, let's say num. This is going to be my variable. Either I can close it with no variable size, the way I did it for example, like array, and then give it some constant variable, or I can go ahead inside here say num has a size maybe 10. But the difference is for array you are using a square like a square bracket, but for vector you are using just parentheses. Remember, since I said vector is a keyword, as soon as you use it, if you defined it properly, if you added the header file, vector is going to change the color. It won't stay black. And anything that the color is changing simply means that's a keyword. And since it is known because the library is added in here, it will change the color. Here, you can have a space or you cannot avoid a space, either for a square bracket defining array or for defining the size of the vector. You may add a space or you may avoid a space. Doesn't matter, you won't get error. Same for pointer. Remember, even for pointer, I said it doesn't matter if you add the space between the variable and the asterisk or you avoid and have them just close to each other. You won't get error. Vector size, again, could be, for example, how do you initialize it? You can just initialize all of the elements right in here inside the parentheses. That's another thing. Or you can have, like, for example, again, like in here, that I have a like constant and then I go ahead and use them inside the array. For vector, you can do the same. For vector, look at here. I can define the score, what is the score before, and then later I can say like in here, I'm going to declare vector to size and content of another vector. So one vector is a score. I'm defining another vector as final. Same in here, I can do that. One vector is num. and the size is 10, I can define another vector. Again, it's still integer. And then I can just connect one vector to another vector to exchange information. The new one, I'm going to call it maybe num1. Num1. And instead of defining again, for example, 10 or any other size, I simply say go get it from num. Num by itself is also another vector. So this is how we can initialize the same size for the second vector based on the size of the previous vector. Of course, you can add element to a vector. In order to, just for example, have a member function, to add elements, you must use the pushback. Pushback, push underscore back is a command. So you have to use pushback member function to add elements to a full array or to an array that has, like, for example, a size like 3 or maybe like 2 if it is two-dimensional, or if it is one-dimensional, maybe one size. So you can simply go ahead and use, in this example, I use num. So you can say num dot push underscore. See, as soon as I type push, immediately it will give me the option to choose push underscore back, which is going to be a member function, since I'm going to add elements. Anytime you want to add element to your vector, use that vector name, which is num in this case, dot push underscore back, and then add element. For example, it was 10, I'm gonna add 15. Means I'm adding another 5. So, and as soon as I close the statement, the color will change. Simply means pushback is also a keyword. Another thing which I'm gonna use in here is size. Size, so pushback is a member function. Now I'm gonna practice using size. So I'm gonna say how large, or how large. I'm gonna give it size. Size for my num. How big is, okay? Or how large is. So I'm gonna say again num dot size to check the size. But since I'm checking the size, assume I'm not aware of what the size is, I leave my parentheses just to be empty. So that's why, so maybe just how big or whatever. That's the, like, actually why I get this one, because these commands couldn't be all of them together. That's why I get, in order to just, if I am asking for that, I cannot right after ask for this one. And this one might be defined, let's say integer hb. Otherwise I'll get error. So then I can ignore this one. And I won't get error anymore. Since this is a variable, how big? I'm going to say how big. So that's how I get the size of my vector if I have no idea. Another one is, how do I remove vector elements? I have another function for that. Again, I use num, which is my vector. I'm gonna just remove something. I'm gonna just remove last element. So I would say dot pop underscore. As soon as I say pop, it will give me the option. I'm removing the last element of the vector. This is the command I can use. Or I'm going to clear. Again, my vector is num, and the command to clear is dot clear. And again, for every single one of this, I must have empty parentheses. And the last one is to find out if your vector is empty or not. So I have to use dot empty to figure that out. Again, I have to put this one inside the while statement, right? And then right inside the statement, definitely I have to include more information in here, which I'm gonna leave just maybe some comment to avoid error. And then right inside the while, I have to say not num is the name of the vector, dot empty. I don't want it to be empty, so I use dot empty as a function to check that. And definitely, as I mentioned, always you have to include parentheses to avoid empty parentheses to avoid error. And that's it. So there are other useful member function. I have already added them right in here for your reference. Let's go through them quickly before I close this session. So member function, like, for example, if you are going to have like return the value, in order to return the value, again, all of these are going to be used by a dot before. Remember, always add a dot before any of them. Dot at ELT. Look at here, dot at. ELT in here, ELT in here is a like name. So it could be anything. It could be just I or any other variable. If you're looking at, for example, returning maximum number, then use dot capacity, like what I do in here. If you are going to reverse the order of the element inside the vector, use dot reverse. To resize it, to size it, I already said use dot size, but to resize it, use just resize. Size is giving you the actual size, get the size, then resize it. Dot resize. And to swap, simply use swap. Means if you are going to exchange the content, if you have more than one vector, which I do have in here, and you are going to swap the information between them, then swap the content of one vector with another one, use dot swap. Hopefully everybody enjoyed this session. As I mentioned one more time before I close the session, please go ahead, since I have already created extra examples for you. Don't miss it. This is for you, to support you, to become more familiar. Remember, I have under the content, also I just solved multiple one-dimensional array, two-dimensional array. Under the lecture, you can just go ahead. I have already created array review to give you more practice with 2D array, including pointer and everything. Hopefully you enjoyed this session.